Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to another episode of Parental Guidance. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Natasha Crain. Natasha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Natasha is a national speaker. She's an author of 4 books, Keeping Your Kids on God's Side, Talking to Your Kids About Jesus, Talking to Your Kids About God, and her 4th and most recent book is called Faithfully Different. She's gone to USC, UCLA. She's got a BA in marketing and business, and she's just got a laundry list of amazing credentials. But perhaps for our listening audience today, Natasha, you could tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you got to be passionate about the topic matter that we're discussing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did not set out to be an author or speaker and talking about all these subjects that we're talking about today. That is for sure. But God always has an interesting journey for us, right? So back in 2011, I had 3 kids who were 3 and under at the time. I have twins and a younger one. And I really was just feeling like when you're in that stage of life, and if there are young parents listening, you can probably relate to this, that everything was about diapers and Cheerios and all those kinds of things. And I just really needed some kind of outlet where I was connecting with other parents, but yet it was really hard to leave the house. So I started a blog. In 2011, everyone was starting a blog. That was like the thing that you did. And so I decided to write about Christian parenting. And basically, I was just writing about the kinds of things that we were doing in our house to help our very young kids at the time know and love the Lord. Very young, very early on. So we're talking about things like, singing songs with them and devotionals and praying together, things like that. But much to my surprise, as my blog started growing and more people started reading it, they were sharing it on social media, it started driving non-believers to my site, people who were coming to check it out. And I suddenly started getting a lot of attacks from skeptics of Christianity. And I certainly wasn't looking for any kind of argument, debate, anything like that, because I was a lifelong Christian, yet I had no idea how to answer the kinds of questions or challenges that they were posing. So I was hearing all kinds of things like there's no evidence that Jesus existed as a person in history. The Bible is filled with errors and contradictions. There's no evidence that God exists, that science and Christianity are opposed to one another. It was just an endless stream. And I really realized at that point, wow, we're doing all these little things with our little kids, but our kids are going to need so much more than what I was thinking they were going to need or what I needed as a kid growing up in a Christian home. And so that really led me to do some research, and I started looking into the questions that people were posing, the claims that were being brought about, and I discovered apologetics, which is how you make a case for and defend the truth of Christianity. And so as I was learning the answers to various questions and claims that were being made, I would turn around and make my blog into a place where I was equipping other Christian parents with an understanding of that. So I would say, hey, this is the kind of stuff that people are saying. Here's a quote from somebody who came to my blog and said this. Here's how we need to respond as parents and how to teach our kids how to respond as they encounter this in the world. And so from that point, my blog kind of blew up because a lot of parents were saying, hey, I need to know this too. I would have no idea how to answer that. And long story short, that eventually led to a publisher reaching out and saying, hey, what if you took 40 of these kinds of challenges, 40 questions that are being posed to kids today, and obviously to adults as well, and wrote just easy to understand 4 to 5 page answers for them, just really focused on parents specifically. And that became my first book, Keeping Your Kids on God's Side. And then from there, people said, hey, we like this format. We like these easy to understand answers. And so I wrote a book called Talking with Your Kids About God, focused more deeply on the God-specific issues about how we know God exists and questions of science and God. And then Talking with Your Kids About Jesus followed that to talk about the Jesus level questions. How do we know Jesus existed? How do we know that he was raised from the dead? What's the historical evidence? Those kinds of questions. And then my latest book is Faithfully Different, which is focused on, it's not parenting. It's my first non-parenting book, but it's focused on how we maintain biblical clarity in a secular culture.
Well, in an article that I read that you wrote in the Christian Research Journal, it was titled Rethinking the Definition of Apologetics. Talk to us about the misconceptions for a few moments that parents have about what teaching apologetics looks like, if you don't mind.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because everything I just described about my journey is kind of the traditional definition of apologetics. I think when people think of it, they think, okay, somebody challenges you and you know how to respond. And that was kind of the focus of those first three books, was helping parents to get equipped with an understanding of those replies. But the more that I sort of came along in this journey, the more I realized that that's a very limiting definition of apologetics. And I think that that's why a lot of parents, when they even understand the word or hear the word, I think that that's a lot of times why they don't want to do anything, because it seems overwhelming. They're thinking, I don't know how to answer this. This is just too much. If my kids need to figure it out, they're going to go online, or maybe they'll just never ask the questions. Or they think of apologetics as something that happens maybe in high school, that there's some kind of formal sit down meeting, that if you're going to do it in the home at all, which a lot of parents just think that's going to happen in church, and it's not going to happen in church. But if they're going to do it in the home at all, they think of it as kind of a formal sit down meeting where dad wears a tie to dinner and says, kids, we're going to talk about apologetics. But that's not what it is at all. And so in that article, and I've talked about this many times as well, really, I try to get parents to think of the definition of apologetics in a much broader sense. So yes, apologetics in its root word is talking about a defense of the faith. But in order to defend something, and this isn't just about even a worldview, anything in general, there are other things that come into play that we have to understand. And so I break this down into a 4-point framework. And this is how I think about discipleship in my own home in terms of what my kids need to understand for being equipped. The first thing is what the Bible teaches. That sounds so basic, right? Of course, our kids should know what the Bible teaches, but overwhelmingly, we're not teaching them that deeply today. And by the way, any of these 4 points I could do like an hour talk on. So I'm going to really bring it down to a couple of key points here. But that's the basic thing, is your kids have to understand accurately and deeply what the Bible teaches, not just, oh yeah, Daniel was thrown into a lion's den and Joseph had a multicolored coat. Yes, those are important accounts in the overall scope of the Bible, but kids need to understand so much more. And we need biblical literacy. But then the second point is why you should believe it. In other words, with that first point, we're just trying to get to an accurate understanding. So many people today mischaracterize Christianity because they don't understand what the Bible teaches. So with that, we're just trying to get them to accurately be able to describe what's in the Bible. But that second point is saying, okay, now that you get what's in the Bible and you can accurately communicate to me what that is, let's talk about why there's good reason to believe it's true. That's the making a case for part of the apologetics argument. And so when we can describe something accurately and then we can make a case for why we believe it's true, those are critical pieces to bring together. And by the way, that's sort of what eventually led me to talking more about worldview types of issues now, to help people understand that, you could teach your kids answers to objections all day, but that doesn't mean that they even fully understand what they're defending. But you can't defend something well until you really understand it. And that's where those two first pieces of the framework come in. So what the Bible teaches, why you should believe it. The third point is, what do others believe? What exactly does culture believe? The research shows that only 6% of Americans have a worldview that's consistent with what the Bible teaches today. Lots of people say they're Christian. In fact, 65% of people say, yes, I'm a Christian, but only 6% have a consistent biblical worldview. So that begs the question for us to ask, well, what does everyone else believe? If 94% of the culture believes something other than what the Bible teaches, what do they believe? And so this is critical for parents to understand, that kids need to know about, because when you don't understand what's going on around you, you don't understand why people believe what they do, you're not going to understand the challenges that they pose. So as you can see, those are 3 points that exist before you even get to a straight defense of what you believe, but they're absolutely critical. Understanding what you'll be defending, understanding why there's good reason to believe it's true, understanding the nature of what other people believe so that you understand where the challenges come from. And finally, yes, number 4, answering the challenges, the kind of classical idea of apologetics. All those 4 things together, it will be what gives your kids a comprehensive understanding of the challenges that they're going to encounter today.
So, Natasha, I think you already covered part of the answer to the question I'm going to ask you now, but I grew up going to Sunday school. We had evening devotions as a child. My dad was a pastor. and, had flannel graph and Bible stories in Sunday school. You make an amazingly accurate analogy using talking about the Tile app in your book, talking to your kids about Jesus. Can you go over how you use that illustration, the Tile app, and how parents treat their kids pretty much the same way?
Yeah. So I talk about the fact that I'm an absolute disaster when it comes to keeping track of my keys. I mean, I cannot find my keys no matter what I do. It's just impossible for me. And so I discovered this thing called Tile, which is this little device that basically you can attach to anything, whether it's keys or your favorite coffee mug, whatever. And if you can't find something, then you can basically call it from your phone and it will make a beeping sound wherever your item is located. And so then you can go and find it. And so, after a while of using this, I stopped caring where my keys were because I was completely reliant on the Tile device. So instead of trying to, come up with a better solution for the key problem, I just now rely completely on my phone to call the keys and I don't have to worry about it. So the reason that I talk about this in the book is that I think that a lot of times as parents, we are tiling out our kids' discipleship to others within the church. And in other words, we are depending so much on other people for our kids' understanding of their faith, whether it's Christian authors or leaders or podcasts they listen to or YouTube or, even your kids' Sunday school. We think, well, I can just farm that out. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I can just use the Tile. And this is really a shame because as the Bible teaches, we are the primary disciplers of our kids. Ultimately, it's not about anyone but us. We have the responsibility of equipping our kids so that they can grow to know and love the Lord and ultimately be a salt and light to others in culture. And so we have to really take that responsibility seriously. That doesn't mean the church isn't an important component of that. Of course it is. This is the body of Christ, and we want our kids to understand the importance of fellowship and being with others and the whole role and function of the church. And the church does come alongside us in what is being taught. But we can't tile it out to someone else. And all of those things that you mentioned about Sunday school and the flannel graphs and all of those things, I mean, those are important. Well, what our kids are taught at church is important. And I'm not trivializing that in any way, but I am encouraging parents to recognize that we've got a tough job today. We have been supposed to be making disciples for Jesus for the last 2,000 years. That hasn't changed, but discipleship itself and the nature of what that looks like changes over time, depending on the culture that you're in. So if we don't understand that, if we don't understand the particular moment that we are in as parents and families, we are not going to be prepared to actually give our kids the training that they need in order to have a very strong faith today.
So I think a lot of our parents and caregivers in my faith community feel overwhelmed. And in your book, Talking to Your Kids About Jesus, you used an excellent example from an article you read. And I believe the article said was like 5 things people with tidy homes don't do. And I love that illustration because it kind of hits the nail on the head. Can you share what that looks like and how parents can use that example as ways to talk to their kids about apologetics and biblical worldview?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if I put myself in somebody else's shoes who maybe hasn't been reading about all this stuff and writing about it and thinking about it for the last decade or so, it sounds overwhelming. It's like, yeah, of course I want my kids to know the Lord. And of course I don't want them to walk away. Of course, but this is hard. This takes a lot of effort. I don't know the answers to all of these questions. And so as a moment of encouragement, I do use this example in the book of coming across this article one day in my Facebook feed that says 5 things that tidy people don't do. And I thought, oh boy, I need to read this because this kind of goes hand in hand with the key example. I'm not the best at keeping a tidy home. This is a challenge. So I click on the article and sort of amazingly, it was actually an insightful piece. It wasn't just clickbait. And one of the things that it said is that tidy people don't act like a slob all day. And then suddenly one time decide to get everything cleaned up in one fell swoop. Instead, people with tidy homes develop these habits of low-grade tidying, where they're constantly in this habit of doing a little bit at a time. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks because I thought, oh, that's so true. I am inclined to let things just kind of go for a long time and then try to clean it up later. But when we try to do a little bit at a time, it feels very different. It doesn't feel so overwhelming. And in the same way, when we think about all these faith conversations, if you think that you're just going to, you know, hope everything's going to work out for the first 17 years of your kid's life, and then in one fell swoop, 6 months before they leave for college, you're going to, have a few conversations with them and say, hey, you know what, there's evidence that God exists. And, there's a lot of reason to believe Christianity is true. You have waited way too long. And that's overwhelming to both you and your kids. It's not what they need. It's not what you should be doing as a discipler. So instead, think of this in terms of tidying up your kids' faith over time, little by little, having these conversations. And you can do that when you get equipped yourself. That takes effort. That takes work. I'm not going to lie. I don't have an easy answer. You're not going to get this stuff by osmosis. You're going to actually have to dig in. You're going to have to read a book. You're going to have to maybe listen to a podcast or watch a video. You're going to have to do something. And there's so many ways that you can do it. But once you do, any little bit of knowledge that you then gain, you can then pass on to your kids. Little by little, day by day, having those conversations in the car, at the dinner table, whatever the circumstances that works in your family. But think of it in terms of that low grade tidying, not cleaning up in one fell swoop at a point so far into the future that it's actually not going to benefit your kids.
So, not to be a broken record, but as it relates to overwhelm, parents are thinking ballet, soccer practice, food preparation, getting my kids to school. Some parents homeschool, some parents do the public school thing. A lot of parents are working mom and working dad. Could you provide for us, obviously, your books and the conversation starters at the end of the chapters in your books are a good place to start, but could you give us a couple of practical examples that maybe you utilize with your teenagers, or you would recommend some small, simple, easy steps for a parent or a mom or a dad who's just getting started in educating their kids about this critical issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, not to be a broken record, but the very first thing I'm going to say is equipping yourself. And I think parents need practical tips on how to do that, because it's one thing to say, okay, what do I do, for my kids? Is there a book, or, what can I give them? But again, we can't skip over what we need to gain ourselves so that we are able to do that low grade tidying over time. So here's the thing. It is difficult to find the time to equip yourself, but here are some things that helped me. I've read hundreds of books over the last decade since I got into this. And that's not because I'm a super person. That's not because I'm special in some way. It's because I realized the urgency and importance of this, and I desperately wanted to get equipped. So in doing that, I found a few things that have been helpful to me. Number one is to figure out kind of your own learning modality. What's the best way for you to learn? Is it reading a book? Is it watching something? Are you more of a video person? Are you more of a podcast person? Do you take it better in listening? And when you figure out the best way for you to learn, then you can figure out how does that fit into your life. So for me, as one example, I'm a reader. I don't listen. I don't like listening to stuff. If somebody sends me a video to watch, I'm like, no, don't send me a video. I have to do this at my own speed. I need to read. Okay. So when can you read? Well, I found that there are lots of times in our life where we're doing things that are otherwise mindless that we can incorporate some of these things into. So for example, blow drying my hair. This is the most boring moment of my day. I'm like fidgety. I'm like, can my hair just get dry? But what I figured out is that I can actually read several pages in the morning on my iPad, because it's an electronic device. So you don't have to actually hold the physical book. And I can read several pages every morning just on my iPad, on my Kindle app. That's a great way for me to do that. And I also found that standing in line at the grocery store, as an example, if I always have my phone or I have my iPad, then I can read while I'm standing in line. There are so many ways. Or if you're, you mentioned sports. Well, I've been a sports parent for many years. I have had more soccer practices and baseball practices than anyone can imagine. Okay, there's a lot of downtime during that. You do not, as a parent, have to sit and watch your kids warm up for an hour before their game. You just don't. I mean, you will see them in the game. You're going to have plenty of opportunities to see your kids. Use that hour and actually listen to something, read something. So all of that to say, those are examples specific to my life, but everyone's got their own rhythms that they can use to figure out, how am I going to work this in? And also identifying time of day. If I try to read before bed, it's over. Like, I am asleep according to my Fitbit, I'm asleep within like 6 minutes. Like, I am out. I'm a morning person. So I actually set my alarm to get up half an hour early and do some reading. So I guess that all I'm saying with this first point is just make sure that you're identifying, how do you learn best, and then find those little times to work it into your day. It's not like you're jumping into a big course or something where you have to find 6 hours of time to do something. It's about little bits at a time. The second thing that I would say in terms of actually giving this to your kids and conveying the information is actually quite similar. It's finding what works out in the rhythm of your life so that you can have those conversations. They're not just going to pop up, especially if your family is not in the habit of having these kinds of conversations. You can't just say, well, okay, I got myself equipped. I read while I was drying my hair, like Natasha said on that one podcast. And now I'm going to be ready if my kids happen to ask me about the scientific evidence for God's existence. Okay, they're probably not going to ask. So you're going to have to be intentional in raising questions, whether your kids ask them or not. And this is one of the most important things that I can tell any parent. You're not a Q&A machine. Your goal is not to get all equipped and hoard all this knowledge to yourself in case your kids ask one of a myriad of questions so that you are ready to pounce and say, oh, yes, I studied this one. I've got it. That's not the point. The point is that now that you know what your kids need to know, whether they know that or not. So it's just like any academic subject, right? You don't wait till your kids ask a question about algebra, for example, or about World War II in order to teach them those subjects. You know the curriculum. You know that this is what they need to learn. It's the same way with their faith development. So when you get these questions, and by the way, that's what my first 3 books are totally intended to do. That's the whole point. It gives you 100 questions that you want to be able to discuss with your kids. Then you can be intentional in planning. It does take planning. It's not going to just pop up. So take a night a week, say on Tuesday nights, every Tuesday night at dinner time, for example, you're going to pick a question out of my books or any other books. I'm just using mine as an example. You can use anything and talk to your kids for, say, we're going to, after dinner for 10 minutes, you're going to talk about this question. By the way, the best thing you can do to minimize complaints, and yes, I have plenty of complaints in my family too. We do not have angels sitting around here like, yes, mom's going to talk to us about worldview again. No, that doesn't happen. But here's what we do. We give them a specific time limit. We say, this is going to be for 10 minutes and we're going to do this. And as long as no one complains and no one is causing trouble, at that 10 minutes will be done. And that gives them kind of a mental guideline for listening. And it cuts down a lot on the problems with that. So you can do that. If you're a sports parent, again, the car rides to sports practices or games, you have a lot of time, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. Take a word. You can say, a word of the week. Okay, we're going to talk about the word faith today. What does this mean according to the Bible? No, it doesn't mean that it's a blind leap of faith that God exists. Here's what it means. It means trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true. Why does it matter? Because lots of atheists think that we're just, blindly believing like unicorns. That's a conversation that can be had in 5 minutes. And I'm throwing out that example because that's just one of the questions, in my books as something that you can talk about. So utilize the time that you have, but know that you're going to have to kind of plan like a teacher of, okay, I'm going to have this conversation this week. And then try to not just say, well, when it comes up, we'll try to have it in this car ride. Maybe set a night a week, like Tuesday nights or Wednesday nights, that after dinner, you're going to talk about these things. And we can go on and on with these examples, but I hope that gives parents kind of an idea of how to strategize and think about this. You equip yourself, you understand the training that's needed today. And I think of it like a mountain. You understand the Mount Everest in front of you. And when you understand what that mountain looks like, you can match your training plan so that your kids can successfully, navigate what's ahead.
Yeah, I like the way you talked about whether you're blow drying your hair, or you're taking your kids to a soccer game. Some people I like Audible and other audiobook apps because, like you said, in between, you can always listen to a book. I could talk for hours about this topic because it's something I'm really passionate about as well. But In the show notes, we're going to have links to how they can find your books, like Keeping Your Kids on God's Side. And I know on Right Now Media, because we did it as a study for our parents, on the book that you have, Talking to Your Kids About Jesus, is also, you partnered, I believe, with Right Now Media and did a little bit of a video series on that one, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, you have your book, Talking to Your Kids About God. And that final book when did you release the book, Faithfully Different? That was it in February or March?
February of 2022, right.
Yeah, that was your newest book, a little bit of a departure, but hopefully we can invite you back and talk a little bit more about your Faithfully Different book. In the show notes, I want to tell all of you that you can go to natashacrain.com, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And she's got a podcast, she has a blog. I believe that you have also a YouTube channel, and they can probably find links to all that on your website. Is that correct? Is that the best way to connect with you and some of the materials that you've published?
Yeah, and my website is Natasha Crain, and Crain is spelled Crain, not Crane like the bird.com.
Excellent. Well, just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, and really appreciate your passion and your enthusiasm, not only for doing the Lord's work, but helping kids and parents do a better job of being salt and light in a world and a culture that desperately needs to hear God, and how they can make a personal relationship with Him affect a profound difference in their world and in their schools today. I appreciate your time, Natasha. It's been great to speak with you.
Great talking with you. Thanks so much for having me on.